Good evening to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to our tropical weather outlook for November 13th, Thursday, 2025. And on today's tropical discussion, all we're going to talk about is pretty much how quiet things are right now and why I think it is pretty much almost the end of hurricane season at this point. And we can even start off with the National Hurricane Center immediately, and you'll see nothing is expected in the next 7 days in terms of tropical activity in the Atlantic. And same goes for the Eastern Pacific. Now, obviously it is still November 13th, but it is starting to look more and more likely, in my opinion, as we progress further and further into the month, that there's not really much else to expect from the Atlantic anymore for the rest of the hurricane season. Now, obviously, that can change, but I'm just going to show you a satellite image right now of how things are looking like in the Atlantic. Nice and quiet, and one thing as well to note that is especially important. Really, not that much in the way of convective activity, especially thunderstorms. You don't really see any more strong tropical waves here in the Atlantic. And on the other hand, one thing that you do see is a lot of very, very strong wind shear, as noted by a lot of these very fast moving upper level clouds. And they are pretty much evident throughout the entire Atlantic basin. And before we get more in depth in the wind shear in a little bit, I do want to show you the sea surface temperature anomalies. And that is one thing that is still holding on right now. Sea surface temperature anomalies in general remain very warm throughout the Atlantic basin, warm throughout the Caribbean, although I will say, especially in recent weeks, looks like things have finally cooled down a little bit. But, you really can't read too much into that for hurricane season at all. It's not obviously not this year anymore, but especially not even next year right now. So just would want to point out that things are cooling down a little bit in the Caribbean right now, but the Gulf still remains very, very warm, especially the central and western Gulf here. They've really not been touched at all in terms of any sea surface temperatures or any tropical activity at all this year. I mean, they did have one storm, Barry, in the Bay of Campeche earlier in the year in late June, which, by the way, if you are interested, the tropical cyclone report on that storm did release. So, but beyond that, really not much else going on. We do have a La Nina in place in the Pacific, and obviously this is going to have its impacts on, not just hurricane season, but on winter as well. And obviously that's going to be much more of a focus as we start heading into these next few weeks here into December and January, when we start reaching the peak of the winter months. And obviously that'll be especially something of interest for watching the weather, especially in the Northeast. And I will say it's been very, very cold, and we're actually going to go over a little bit in terms of the United States weather and what to expect here in the next week or so. But I will say, especially over the last several weeks, it's been pretty cold. And you could actually start seeing that reflected in some of the sea surface temperature anomalies here, as we're going to start getting much more of these Arctic blasts and these cold fronts to come sweeping down. That will reflect, it will erode, especially in some of these sea surface temperatures right along the coastline, particularly the shelf waters here along the Gulf Coast and off the southeast coast. And you can definitely see that we've already had a pretty nice Arctic front that has come through, brought pretty frigid cold temperatures here in New York City, dropped below freezing a few nights ago. And it's pretty much going to remain kind of on the cooler side, although maybe return a little bit more towards normal in the next few weeks. At least that's for here. But I will go over the overall temperature outlook for the United States towards the end. So stay tuned for that. But in terms of the tropics, Atlantic remaining warm, especially the eastern Atlantic here. And this is going to be of interesting, something to watch as we head into the winter months and into next hurricane season. And we'll obviously start talking a little bit more about that in a few weeks, especially once we get towards the new year and we start entering 2026. Then we'll, start getting a little bit more into talking about how next year will be. But in terms of right now, as I showed you with the satellite picture here in the Atlantic, lots of very, very strong wind shear. Definitely not like earlier on in the year where you saw a lot of greens, especially in the eastern tropical Atlantic and even throughout the Caribbean. Nope, it is all shaded in now with red, and obviously red standing for unfavorable, very, very strong wind shear. And that is obviously something very typically that we see in the winter months as we start getting the jet stream and the subtropical jet to become more active. So wind shear starts to pick up, especially throughout the tropics, and that's just generally how the atmosphere works as we head into the winter months, especially in the northern hemisphere. And because of that, too, in terms of energy in the deep tropics, and this is something, and we're using the 850 millibar vorticity, definitely a very good way. I like to a map that I like to use a lot, especially when it comes to talking about the amount of energy in the atmosphere and, talking about the spin and vorticity. And obviously, you really don't see a lot of that in the tropics anymore. You kind of have a few pockets here and there, maybe still a few weak tropical waves left coming off the coast of Africa, although in just a few weeks or so, that is also going to stop too. We tend to get tropical waves in the Atlantic only from around May till late November. So we're probably going to stop seeing tropical waves as well emerge off the coast of Africa, and we're probably just going to be left with a ITCZ area here in the far southern Atlantic that'll probably remain there throughout the rest of the year and into the winter and spring. And then conversely, on the other hand, you're starting to see that transfer of power away from the deep tropics and once again into the subtropics as the subtropical jet becomes much more active as we head into the winter. So once again, continuing the transition away from hurricane season and more into the winter-like pattern. You also see that as well as we now have a lot of mid-level dry air, and especially through the Caribbean here. But obviously, you see that we do have a pretty strong jet here that extends from the northern Caribbean through the subtropics. So I guess some moisture being brought to portions of the western Caribbean here, including Cuba and Central America. But no signs of life in terms of any tropical development. So all of this showing that it looks like climatology is now catching up and we are now heading towards the end of the hurricane season. And to sum it all up, to kind of prove that, here's the GFS going out towards the next week here. And I'm just going to really quickly take it out here towards the next week. And pretty much nothing happens. Looks like there's a small development that tries to happen in the Eastern Pacific. Maybe we might get a weak storm or so to get going here, and that still sometimes happens in the Pacific. In the month of November, we could get a weak storm to develop or two, and also in the Atlantic as well, sometimes in the Western Caribbean and in the subtropics as well. But you notice, there's maybe an interesting little low here that breaks off from this piece of energy in the northern Atlantic. But in terms of anything actually solid that is worth watching, nothing of pretty much any major note here over the next week in the Atlantic. So it looks like, and as we get towards the next week, we get to November 20th, and by that time, we only have 10 days left of the hurricane season. So it's pretty safe to say now that we might be finally seeing a ramp down, and hurricane season is pretty much coming to a close as we are seeing it now for the year of 2025. And as that's happening, we're going to shift more towards the United States weather. And obviously, we're going to go over more what's happening from the National Weather Service, weather.gov, and what's going on today. Well, not much. Looks like there are some red flag warnings in effect for Nebraska and South Dakota. And they actually have a top headline here talking about an atmospheric river in California. So you see a bunch of flood watches in effect for that. So it looks like they might get a bunch of heavy rain here in Southern California. And obviously they always need it, especially because they tend to have drought conditions from time to time. And there's always the risk of fires and of, wildfires as well out west. So, having a bunch of rain definitely helps dampen that, but there's also the risk of flooding too, and also snowfall as well in the northern mountains here in the inland valley of California. But then meanwhile, further out east, not much happening. Again, it's been much cold. It's been pretty cold over the last week or so, especially here in the eastern portion of the United States, including the Northeast. But it looks like a warm-up is on the way. This is the Climate Prediction Center outlook for the next 6 to 10 days. Looks like things are going to be below normal as we get a much more wet pattern here in the western portion of the United States, including California. And the east begins to warm up quite a bit, well above normal temperatures, especially across the southeast. And that extends up through pretty much the entire eastern half of the United States into the northeast. So if you've been dealing with the very, very cold December-like temperatures, I've dipped down into the 30s, even low 30s here in New York City for quite a decent chunk of this week so far. It looks like we might see a little bit of relief from that and start getting back more towards a mid-autumn, early fall type pattern. And hopefully, that would kind of give us at least one last breath of, slightly warmer temperatures here before we probably officially start setting into more winter-like temperatures. And eventually, as we head into December and January, we're going to get Arctic blasts. And obviously, that is going to bring very frigid temperatures. And with that comes the risk of snowfall, especially potentially, sometimes we might have a chance for big time snow events here, especially in the New England, Mid-Atlantic, and Northeast region. And we've not had a lot of that over the last several years, but there have been some pretty interesting indications from what I've seen on Twitter. And sometimes people tend to hype the winter season up quite a bit. Kind of like hurricane season. There's always a lot of hype surrounding hurricane season every single year. But we'll see if it pans out. But things are definitely looking interesting for winter. And obviously, as the tropics are now quiet and we are entering the final weeks, we're going to transition away from the tropics and obviously transition a little bit more into winter weather. But for now, still in hurricane season, so we're going to keep an eye out on things. But again, looking like we are officially beginning to quiet down for this hurricane season for good. Obviously, for this hurricane season, though, obviously we're going to have activity next year. But in terms of this year, I think it's starting to become safe to be able to say that we are probably close to, if not pretty much at the end of hurricane season. But that's not going to be the end of the videos that we're going to be doing this year. We're still going to be doing videos at least throughout the rest of the month. I'm going to have another one on Saturday, and then probably after that, another video or two next week. So if you want to stay tuned for that, I would really appreciate it if you like this video, comment, and subscribe to my channel. And, still subscribe. It may not be hurricane season anymore, but we're still going to be doing these videos from time to time. I still do off-season videos at least once a week, and obviously we're going to go over winter weather, whatever weather events might be happening in the United States, and obviously going over ENSO conditions and hurricane season for next year as well. So, we're not going to completely just shut things off as we head into the winter months, but obviously a lot less focus on what is actually happening currently in the tropics, as once again, things are quieting down. With that being said, I'm going to end it off for today. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. And I will see you with more on Saturday.